Hello, everyone. Welcome to day two of the Virtual Islands Summit. Thank you so much for joining this session, whether it's your morning, your noon, or your evening. My name is Ariana Abdul Noor, and I am the Sustainable Development Manager here at Island Innovation, based in the very tropical island of the United Kingdom. For those of you who aren't familiar with our work, Island Innovation is a sustainable development consultancy focusing primarily on islands. Our services include events, strategic communications, and capacity building. We're trusted by clients around the globe, and if you'd like to learn more about our work, please reach out using the contact information in the chat. Before we begin, we'd like to get to know you guys a little bit better, so you'll see a poll on your screen very soon. Please let us know your gender, where you're connecting from, and the sector or industry that you belong to. I see a lot of communication in the chat. We have someone from Scotland. Thank you for joining. I appreciate it's a little bit late from Cabo Verde. Always lovely to have some representation. Some more Scotland, Trinidad and Tobago, Falkland Islands, welcome. South Wales, Jersey, Vancouver, fantastic. I see the calls coming through. We have a lot of Europe, which is impressive considering the time zone. I know it's 7 o'clock where I am. Caribbean slowly creeping up in the percentages there. In terms of representation of sector, we've got government, academia, which is very on brand, given that we're talking about education. And in terms of industry, environmental services, which again makes a lot of sense for what we're about to dive into today. So thank you all so much for showing up wherever you are in the world. I'm very, very happy to be moderating this session today titled Teaching Inside the Box, Flipping the Narrative on Island Education. It's too often that we hear about island schools as though they're isolated or disadvantaged, but in reality, they are the ones at the forefront of this innovation. This session is about turning that story around, looking at how island communities are building their own models of education, decolonizing curricula, embedding indigenous knowledge, and empowering local educators. Over the next hour, you'll hear from an amazing panel of people who work directly on these issues in different parts of the world. We have Dr. Andrew Jennings, Associate Professor in Island Studies Institute, Northern Studies, University of the Highlands and Islands in Shetland. We have Dr. Laurie Brinklow, Assistant Professor in Island Studies, Coordinator, Master of Arts in Island Studies, Chair, Institute of Island Studies, University of Prince Edward Island, Canada. As you'll see, many hats across the board. We also have Dr. Therese Ferguson, Senior Lecturer in Education for Sustainable Development at the University of the West Indies at Moana, Jamaica. Dr. Rosie Alexander, Postdoctoral Fellow of the Danish School of Education in Aarhus University in Denmark. And last but by no means least, Dr. Simon Clark, Senior Lecturer and Head of Section Creative Communities at the University of the Highlands and Islands. During this session, please use the chat as you have been doing so far to introduce yourself, where you're joining from, and make any comments. For questions for the panelists, please use the Q&A function. Include your name, your country, and indicate which panelist it's for. We'll try to address as many of you as possible during the Q&A segment at the end. So let's dive in. To start us off, and given this session is called Teaching Inside the Box, I'd like to focus on what we mean exactly by the box. So I'd like to welcome Dr. Andrew Jennings to the stage, the virtual stage. Hi, Andrew. Lovely to have you on this evening. So, Andrew, you lead several postgraduate programs on Viking, Orkney, and Shetland and research how the history, the languages, and the folklore of Northern Islands shape their present-day realities and identities. From your perspective, beyond these standardized metrics, how can we define and measure educational success in an island? What aspirations of young islanders and how do we sort of shape this education in response to that?
Well, thank you very much, Ari, for that question. And well, just before I say that, I just wanted to also say that the reason for coming up with this idea of teaching inside the box is to sort of reframe the limitations of island life, geography, culture, and resources, not as obstacles, but as a framework for developing new and exciting and innovative innovative educational systems. And I think that's what we've got here in the Scottish Islands with the University of the Highlands and Islands, which covers the mainland of the Highlands, but also the Scottish Islands. And one of our main goals is to bring education, tertiary and higher education, to island communities, and to allow young islanders to thrive, to have successful careers, whether they want careers outside the islands, educate them to go and be successful in the urban areas, or if they want to live in the islands or come back to the islands, that they have the education helps them to succeed doing that as well. And as people live in communities, I think that one of the aspirations for young people is that the communities are vibrant, that the ones that they're living in are successful. And again, UHI, that's the acronym for University of the Highlands and Islands, it's one of its part of its ethos is to provide a transformational impact on the people and communities that it serves. So so aspiring young islanders, they can get the education that they need, and that they can live in vibrant communities that will provide them with the careers that they want to do, that they aspire to. And also there's this other thing, certainly very strong in islands, and in other places too, but it's definitely clear in islands from the research that I do, that islanders tend to have a very strong sense of belonging, and a community, a connection as well. So helping people, educating people to know more about their culture, their heritage, their identity, it sort of bolsters their sense of belonging as well. It encourages those who've gone away for education to come back, because they're drawn back to their island homes. And it also helps them to, it helps their well-being as well. So so a number of these things. Young islanders, they want good jobs, they want to live in good communities, and they want to have well-being, good mental health as well. And I think education should aspire to achieve all these goals. Harry, you're on mute.
Thank you, Andrew, for that. Classic. Thank you so much for those contributions. I think something that we notice a lot is this brain drain from islands because of lack of opportunity or lack of perceived opportunity. So I think what's a good thing for our audience to understand is sort of what are the aspirations of these young islanders and how should education respond. So I know in an ideal world, we would just have these primary and tertiary levels of education and higher education on all islands so that we can retain that, that community, but it's not always possible. So how can education, one, respond to the aspirations, and two, sort of adapt given its circumstances in the respective islands that we're working with?
Well, we have to know what people, find out what people want. What do the communities need, and how do we address that? How do we provide education that allows aspiring people to actually live and thrive in their communities? The education, does it, for example, if you live in a fishing and farming community, should education address that so that people can learn more about farming and fishing within their own community without going away? We do that here in Shetland. We have a part of the college in UHI Shetland focuses on marine research, but also educating young people who want to become skippers on fishing boats and on part of the merchant marine as well. So that was a very sort of they had foresight when they set that up, so that young Shetland people didn't have to go to Aberdeen or the other parts of the mainland to learn the traditional skills. They could actually do that at home. So I know it's difficult if you live in a community that doesn't have tertiary or higher education, and how to address that without actually leaving is a very difficult one. You have to hope that the powers that be will be able to provide that, or if you're lucky enough that there are programs that are devised elsewhere that you can tie into using, the internet and VC. We do that. So there are certain communities that don't have direct access to colleges across the Highlands and Islands, but they can attend all sorts of programs and get degrees and master's degrees, even in the most outlying and isolated communities. So as long as they have good broadband, of course. So although we have higher education across the Scottish Islands, there are still communities that are so isolated that they can't actually make it into the colleges, but they can still benefit from the programs that we have by learning online and by using the internet. So if you live in a community that doesn't have higher education or tertiary education, then jolly well make sure that the powers that be provide you with good broadband.
Yes, not always a luxury that we're all afforded. I just wanted to also share in the chat Andrew's latest publication that we shared on our website, as Andrew is part of our academic council. So it's called From Periphery to Powerhouse, New Policy Paradigm for Scottish Islands. So if you're looking into learning a little bit more about, one, Andrew's work, but two, the particular sort of nuances and things faced by Scottish Islands, I would welcome you all to take a read. Thank you so much, Andrew, for those contributions.
Thank you, Ari.
I'm gonna sort of move on now to a different theme, and well, similar theme, but in a different context, which is overcoming structural challenges. Dr. Laurie Bricklow, so you coordinate the Masters of Arts in Island Studies at the University of Prince Edward Island, which I've been very fortunate enough to visit last year when we had our Global Sustainable Island Summit on the island. How do you think that island communities express identity and belonging? This is something that you're working on heavily. So how are you addressing some of these insider-outsider notions surrounding island education as a first kind of conversation in these challenges?
Yeah, thank you, Ari. And it was so good to have you here last summer, and hope that we actually get to meet on another island sometime. My program, the program here in Island Studies, has been going for over 20 years now. And we've had over close to 250 students go through from all around the world. Of course, thinking about island studies, one of the first questions is, why is there enough about Prince Edward Island that you have a whole master's program? And so one of those first things we have to do is say, no, it's global islands, and it's from islands all around the world, looking at ourselves through the lens of other islands. And so those are the kinds of lessons that we're trying to teach our students, that they're not just doing research on islands or about islands, but you're actually doing research with islands, you're thinking with islands, you're putting islands front and center. And because we are generally small or peripheral, but yet we think of ourselves at the center, we overcome that those stereotypes, I suppose, by putting ourselves forward and telling our own stories. One of my favorite stories to tell is when I first came to Prince Edward Island. I worked as a book publisher, and we were creating the grade 6 social studies textbook at the local publishing company. And I remember there were pictures of local people in the book, and the students would say, "Oh my gosh, that's so-and-so from the post office," and it just elicited such a wonderful sense of pride in what we were doing here on Prince Edward Island, the stories that we were telling. And so it's always been part of our mandate through Island Studies to publish local books, whether they're poetry, natural history, cookbooks, but we are also publishing a lot of global island stories as well. And so it's that telling, and we're finding that with students coming from all around the world, we have about half domestic students, half international, that people come with their stories from their islands, and we're learning all about their identities and what are the commonalities and the similarities that we might share amongst these different places. And that's where the richness is in that sharing and personal stories. Looking at the academic articles that come out of so many resources now in island studies. We have Island Studies Journal, we have the Journal of Island Marine Cultures and SHIMA, and the Okinawan Study, or a Journal of Island Studies, and all these other journals that are devoted to islands and coastal regions, that we have no end of resource material to use to teach our students about islands. Oh, you're on mute again.
We'll get it by the third speaker. Thank you so much, Laurie. You are 2 steps ahead of me there, because what I was going to sort of ask you is how, you know, the different contexts work without sacrificing the local context, how you actually build that regional collaboration. And I know you wrote that wonderful book called The Bridge Effect, so reflecting on sort of this age of technology and how it can both impact but also benefit islands. So just to sort of rehash that idea then, how do you create this regional collaboration that doesn't sort of compromise that local context?
We are all about connection and making connections and growing our, what we call our Island Studies family. I'm the president of the International Small Island Studies Association, which has been an absolute joy to get to go to so many different islands and being part of different research projects, working with Andrew Jennings. We co-edited The Bridge Effect. We brought together probably a dozen authors looking at the impacts of bridges on islands, because that's probably one of bridges and other connections. For instance, you know, the digital connection. And I know James Ellsmore and Vincent have a chapter in the book as well. And it's just been so amazing bringing all of these people and minds together, yet sharing our local stories, but getting them out there into the world. Even in my classrooms, we are an primarily in-person master's degree, so students have to come here, but I guest lecture in Andrew's class and he guest lectures in mine, and we bring together a joint class of our students so they can get to talk to each other about some of those wonderful you know, the similarities and difference. And it's more about similarities and differences. That's what I'm finding. I have a long-standing relationship with Massey University. So, you know, our friend Gerard Princeton zooms in from the future and talks to us about stuff. And it's just such a rich global resource, right? The world with the internet and with travel, it's at our fingertips, and we are really plugged into all of these wonderful resources around the world and people. We also send our students to conferences. We try to find the money so that they can actually go to some of these places and meet some of their idols. And we have, you know, Godfrey Baldacchino was just here for the summer, and so I had him introduce my first class, because he, you know, is our rock star in island studies, and he knows so much, and the students absolutely love it. So having access to that has just been a real treasure.
Fantastic. I don't know, Andrew, if you wanted to say something. I see you've come on screen, or you just were eagerly invested.
Yeah, eagerly invested. And it's always good to hear what Laurie has to say, and just to agree that it's the similarities rather than the differences that always are, well, not surprising, because we know this now, but are always clear and obvious. Yeah, and exactly. And our shared session that we run when we have Laurie's students and my students together to discuss things is always a very fruitful event. And having Laurie teach my students about the islandness of Prince Edward Island is always a highlight. And I like the opportunity to talk about various aspects of Shetland to her students as well. So we find that our own expertise, our own knowledge of our own islands is relevant to communities elsewhere. So it's important when it comes to island education that we realize that there's a network of communities out there and we can learn from each other, and communities can tap into this existing body of knowledge.
Sometimes I think we shouldn't be called island studies, but rather archipelagic studies, because we are a huge archipelago and we learn from each other and we're all connected to one another. So islands are about connection as well as separation, and we do that really well, I think.
Absolutely, absolutely. And this is something that we see so much at Island Innovation and working with our partners, such as you guys from the Academic Council, is people, one, think that islands exist in silos and often operate in silos. But two, people end up then trying to reinvent the wheel every time they do a project or deliver some kind of educational program. And we like to identify that actually, visiting Prince Edward Island and then visiting Scotland and then visiting New Zealand and all the other islands around the world, the aim is to actually be like, no, actually, instead of starting from scratch, you can take the lessons learned from Laurie's class and apply it to your context. And of course, there's nuances, but there's a lot to be shared there. So thank you so much both for your contributions there. I'm going to move on now to Dr. Therese Ferguson. I know she was having some troubles with her camera, so it might be the case that it's just her voice, but we're happy to have her here nonetheless. Dr. Therese, can you hear me?
Yes, I hope you are hearing me. I don't know if you are seeing me.
Perfect, even better. Dr. Therese, so your work at UWI Mona focuses on embedding sustainability and peace education into the curriculum, and as a result, empowering schools and teachers to drive change from within. In practice, what does a truly decolonized curriculum look like in your context? And I know that this is a big question and we don't have all the time we'd like, but I'd love to just pick your brains about your work and how it feeds into this.
Sure. Thank you for that question. I think from my perspective, a decolonized curriculum would have several characteristics. For instance, it involves honoring and engaging with um, the local knowledge, community knowledge, indigenous knowledge, along with person's own individual knowledge. So it's moving away from those Western dominant perceptions to really embracing and engaging with localized and contextualized knowledge. I think as well, a decolonized curriculum involves the creation of our own resources. Very often, we're dependent upon resources from Western or industrialized contexts, and these may be divorced from what is actually happening within an island context. And so very often we may be called to, if we really want to engage with individuals and meet them where they are, to create our own contextually relevant resources. So I think that's another characteristic of decolonized curriculum. And then as well, I think really just building on person's individualized knowledge so that we're hearing and learning from persons' own experiences. Individuals have their own experiences that they can build on. This is sort of this constructivist approach to learning where we are telling them, come into the classroom. You have experience, whether it's from job settings, whether it's from your family, your community, and we can use that as a basis to learn from one another and to generate knowledge together. So I think those would be some of my comments in terms of what this decolonized curriculum looks like.
Thank you so much for those contributions. I wonder then, how do you empower local educators to become the primary drivers of curriculum development, including, of course, Indigenous and local knowledge in the sort of sustainability and peace realm that you're involved in?
Okay, so for instance, I can share in terms of a project that my colleague and I recently engaged in. So we were looking at the infusion of education for sustainable development into the mathematics curricula. Normally, when persons think of either sustainable development or think about education for sustainable development, sometimes they have these ready-made subjects in their mind. It could be either social studies or science, but we wanted to engage with math. And so, of course, when we began looking at the curriculum itself as a basis for what we were going to do with the teachers, we realized that while there were a lot of implicit opportunities for ESD infusion, there weren't as many explicit opportunities. So we wanted to empower the educators that we were working with. These were 5 individuals based at one primary school. We had a workshop where we invited them alongside, other colleagues. So it was an open workshop, and we shared with them what ESD looks like, conceptions of sustainable development, ESD, pedagogies for this. But more than our sharing, we heard from them how they saw these concepts and how they saw them being played out in their educational setting. From there, when we went into the schools, we said we didn't tell them what to do. We said, you're the teachers, you know the curriculum, you have this understanding of ESD. What do you think could be done? Where do you think you could start? And so we invited them to develop and create their own lesson plans. So they each chose different topics, different values, different principles, and chose the grade level. And then they set about infusing. We, gave them feedback, but by and large, we left them to their own devices. And when we went into the classroom to really observe what they were doing, it was absolutely amazing because the students were talking, the discussions were flowing. These are primary level students, grades 1 through to grade 6. And at these different levels, they were building on their own knowledge. And this was because of the work that the teachers themselves had started. So I find that an exciting example to share in terms of that.
This is fantastic. I know there are some comments in the chat about how interesting that lens is. And I think so often in the education system, especially at the lower levels, we tend to be very sort of passive observers, not often out of choice. So I think inviting them to create their own lesson plan, giving them agency, but sort of with the right tools. And I think that's the most important bit, giving them the right resources to shape their own agenda and allow them to be part of that process really helps people engage in their own futures, and of course in turn have it be informed by the local community. So really, really fantastic work, Dr. Ferguson, and thank you for your contribution.
Thank you.
I will now invite Dr. Rosie Alexander to our virtual stage, who will share a little bit about sort of inside the box innovation. Hi, Dr. Alexander. So your research looks at geography and community and how that shapes young people's careers and their pathways. Can you share perhaps a compelling case study of an island-led pedagogical innovation that you've come across? Perhaps something that's emerged directly from local constraints and opportunities for our audience.
Yeah, thanks so much, Ari. It's a pleasure to be here. So the majority of my work has looked at young people's aspirations and how young people navigate their ways through education systems. I'm a specialist in career learning and career guidance, so the kinds of student support services that are offered at schools and at universities to help young people make choices about their education and their work and their futures more broadly. So from my own work, I would say that the clearest example is that I have been putting forward a model of career guidance or student support, which tries to bring place in to the ways that we talk about futures with young people. Because so often when we talk to young people about their futures, we talk about their career choices and their work and their education choices as if they're made in the abstract, without any reference to place. So we typically talk to students about their skills and their values, and what jobs they might want to do. And I'm interested in whether we can introduce that focus on place, asking young people where they might want to live in the future, how they feel about their communities, how they feel about moving, so that we can really embed a sense of community and place into the work that we do. I think that there's a risk if we don't do that, if we just talk to people, young people, about their futures as if it's jobs and careers and education in the abstract, we can inadvertently encourage young people to leave. And we need to help young people to see different kinds of spatial futures and acknowledge that some young people do want to leave, some young people really want to leave, and some young people don't. So we need to engage with that more in our work as careers advisors, student support staff, and in career education. I realize that my perspective is probably a little bit niche. So the other thing that I would say is that I've come across a number of different kinds of pedagogical innovation more broadly within higher education, which have thought about how to use the strengths of island communities and address some of the challenges. So I was involved in editing a book last year, which looked at higher education in small islands. And some examples from that. We had a chapter from some scholars who were looking at higher education in a range of small states. And they talked about how internationalization is a very important agenda for higher education, but how it might look different in small communities, including things like internationalization at home and finding ways of internationalizing the curriculum without necessarily involving student mobility. And another example that I've come across is Hofgaard's work in Greenland, where he has written about an innovative master learning approach, which is creating a very flexible form of master's level provision to cater for the diverse needs within an island community, recognizing that you can't deliver every form of education. So you deliver a flexible form of master's education. And in that program, they combined the sort of educational aspects with a kind of apprentice-based learning, so work-based learning, and a period of study abroad. So those are some examples.
Thank you. That is fantastic. I hope I put the right link into the chat. It's probably one of the many books you've written, but I found the reference, and I hope that everyone will get a chance to read it, and I will also make some time to do so as well. I think that's a fantastic perspective about kind of choice, sort of going off the back of Dr. Ferguson's conversation, and actually not everyone does want to pursue a higher education, or not everyone does want to leave the islands, and it's about showing what opportunities are in the islands education wise, but beyond education, how different forms of education, how that manifests in a community. So I think the work you're doing is fantastic, and I'm sure they're very lucky to have you as a mentor and guiding them through that. So thank you so much, Dr. Alexandra. I will now invite Dr. Simon Clark to the screen. Now we want to move on to sort of lessons for the world. So, as we're speaking about a very globalized context, despite people thinking that islands very much exist in these silos. So, Dr. Clark, you combine a background in archaeology with decades of experience in teaching remote and island contexts. What can these sort of larger mainland educational systems learn from the agility, this community-centric focused, and the resilience of island education models?
I think there are lots of positive things that I've experienced in teaching and learning in the Highlands and Islands University. I think, ironically, one of the things which they potentially can show the wider context is how to be less insular. The University of the Highlands and Islands was set up to allow people to study at higher education level in situ without leaving the region. And it did that by using digital technology, primarily video conferencing and virtual learning environments, but later on also digital libraries. And that has allowed quite unusual kind of ecosystem of learners to develop, which I think is very instructive. We have a lot of part-time students. We have a lot of mature students, and I have found that a very rewarding environment in which to teach. In a conventional university, people tend to go straight from school into a university context, and you get essentially a monoculture of 18 to 21-year-olds for the undergraduate courses. UHI doesn't have that. It has a lot more people joining education later in their lives with life experience, and I think that's a fantastic resource for the cohort of students to actually draw on. And I think it's actually a kind of a wider societal lesson, really, about living together. Not isolated into age cohorts or class cohorts. But every being able to draw on a much wider pool of people. So that's I think one of the primary things that the wider university sector can learn from this. In a lot of respects, the conventional model is quite unhealthy. And I think in a world where we are kind of disappearing into self-selecting silos, actually forcing people of very different backgrounds, ages, classes, and even discipline areas to actually collaborate together is a very healthy development, which actually should be something we're thinking about. And I think there are a lot of isolated people out there who aren't in rural or island communities. You can be in the middle of London or Birmingham and be very, very isolated. So I think this is potentially a way of reaching people who perhaps wouldn't conventionally re-engage with education. They don't have to cut their ties with employment or family. They can study. It's much more flexible. So it allows people who perhaps don't have the emotional or financial resources to kind of commit fully to a 4-year program to dip their toe in, to stop and start. We have a lot of programs with exit points after the first full year of study. We also encourage a lot of interdisciplinary learning, a lot of sharing of modules between different programs. And that's partly a forced necessity of a small institution, but it's also been a deliberate strategy to actually get have a less kind of siloed view of our different topics, and that's been hugely beneficial for me. I started out at Bradford University, and I was an archaeologist who didn't talk to the wrong type of archaeologists down the corridor. Now I'm interested in a much wider range of heritage resources, intangible as well as material culture. I'm finding parallels and useful inputs from literature and from creative writing and things like that, as well as for my own discipline area. So I think this is probably the primary thing that has a wider applicability beyond the island context. Is that I'm blasting away at this? Is that I better stop and let somebody else get a word in edgeways, I guess.
We'd love for you all to speak all evening. And I know that you all have a lot to contribute. But yeah, there's so much to unpack there. I mean, firstly, with this not just interregional collaboration, but intergenerational as well, is something that we're trying to really combat and work with, because we notice that it tends to be the sort of youth or people that are under 30 or 35, whatever the UN definition is, put in this box, and it's an unhelpful box in the context of kind of agency, because they are only on youth panels in, whether it's at COP or New York Climate Week or wherever the space is, and they tend to be in spaces where their echo chamber is just other young people who are equally kind of frustrated with the systems, equally kind of despondent about the next steps. And what we're really trying to do is create that intergenerational conversation so that it's actually working together, kind of like a relay, a back and forth to see how they can collaborate. And I think it's fantastic that this remote setting and this remote working setting has allowed for people who perhaps wouldn't have been able to do a master's or an undergrad or a PhD before because of commitments due to work or families or financial constraints, but allowing them to sort of get back into the system and have those conversations with people who are at the beginning of their career, starting to build that ladder and build those ideas, and so they can do it together. So it's really fantastic, and thank you for the work that you're doing with that. I know James Elsmore, our CEO, I believe he had some of his remote for his university course, and my own master's was during COVID, and that was completely remote as well. So it's interesting to look back and see how that was valuable, being able to work with people from different regions of the world who I wouldn't have otherwise been in contact with. So very, very interesting insights there. Thank you so much.
If I may add a secondary point, there's a facet of the video conference which I think is a really interesting one in the context of higher education, which is particularly where you've got PC-led video conferencing. Everybody's basically in their own box. It's actually quite difficult to tell where the front of the classroom is. So the traditional hierarchy of the front of the classroom with a podium for the professor is actually eroded significantly. And I think this is a fantastic platform for collaborative learning and for actually encouraging students to be essentially kind of trainee academics, to actually engage on an equal footing with their more experienced, more senior colleagues, in a sense, that are actually allegedly leading the class. And I think particularly where you've got a very diverse class, I've been astonished at the resource that's out there, not just from older people, but from young people as well, who often can bring a fantastic wealth of local knowledge or specialist knowledge in plants or animals, which brings a different facet to a subject which you hadn't thought that those subjects could contribute to. So I think that aspect of the new technology is enormously empowering, and actually we should try and exploit that more.
Definitely, I like that reframing of the dynamic and how people are posited in these institutions, and not just having this kind of hierarchy of academics and professors teaching, but actually having it as a wider conversation. So I guess in light of that, I'd actually like to bring all the other speakers on the screen so we can have a bit of that community feel, even though we are all remote on different time zones. And I'd like to go now to the Q&A box. We have a lot of good questions in the thread. So feel free, sort of, for whoever it feels most relevant for, / it can be very much a dynamic conversation where there's a few of you that it makes sense for to jump in. But the first question is, how well do island education providers align the current needs and opportunities and future needs and opportunities in key sectors such as health, energy, food, agriculture, tourism, etc.? Does anyone want to jump in on that one?
I could maybe say something. So yeah, my work looks at young people and their aspirations, and employers and their needs, and how higher education systems work within island communities to meet those needs of students and employers. And I think what we see in the smallest islands is that economies of scale mean that you cannot meet all the needs within a small island, because the number of career routes are so diverse. So, there's one educational psychologist in Orkney, and so it would be not feasible to run the training route that you need to do, the single specific training route you need to do in educational psychology in Orkney for that one job. So economies of scale mean that it's going to be very difficult for island higher education to meet all the needs of all sectors. So one of the things that I have been thinking about is how I think it's more effective to think about higher education as a sort of hub within a wider higher education system, so that your local higher education provides routes into the rest of the system. So you might start off with a 1-year course or a 2-year course, or do an undergraduate degree in your island university, and then you might progress somewhere else. Equally, you might study somewhere else and then come back into your island. Your island might run niche courses, specialist courses in a field that it has a particular reputation in. So the University of the Highlands and Islands is a great example, actually. It's got some really strong courses aligned to the bigger and most prominent sectors in the islands. So then it brings students in. So I think we need to move away from thinking about higher education in islands as trying to meet all the needs of all sectors, because I don't think that's possible. And I think we should think much more creatively about higher education as a sort of part of the wider system. That would be my pitch.
Thank you for that. I don't know if, yeah, Simon, you have your hand up. I know that there's a comment in the chat that maybe you can sort of feed off as well, but they said it was Yashin, I'm sorry if I'm butchering that. Thus, the need to zoom in on agribusiness-based community development projects that includes a circular economy and energy, water, shelter, food, employment, and empowerment. So I don't know if Simon, that feeds into anything you're about to say, but
well, I was going to answer the question about how do education providers how well do they match what's needed with what they're providing. I think the honest answer is not very well. If by education providers we mean the institutional level, and I think we do need to find ways in which the grassroots can actually innovate within a framework to actually meet need, because I think educational planners are exceptionally bad at anticipating need very often, certainly, and even anticipating the technology and how it can best be transmitted and things like that. So I think we do need to think about how provision is met. There is a tendency for the existing institution and its staff to simply replicate itself and find work for itself. So I think in a rapidly changing world with new technologies and new ideas needing to be propagated, we need to find ways for innovators to thrive and actually to get their product to market is maybe not quite the right term to be used, but to actually get their service to the people that need that service. Let's put it that way.
Yeah, very sort of industry talk for academics, and I know that it's important to marry the two because, of course, working in tandem. But is there any other thoughts on that from anyone else, Laurie?
I think that here in Atlantic Canada, Prince Edward Island is a very small island, 180,000 people, which, is smaller than some neighborhoods in Toronto. We are really good at working together with other groups, and fortunately are in close proximity to other provinces and territories in Atlantic Canada, and then making those linkages across the ocean down to the eastern seaboard of the United States, and drawing upon the expertise that we have. Even in our healthcare system, we if somebody has big heart issues, they get outsourced to Halifax, and those kinds of drawing upon making do or being creative, as Simon has said, to figure out what's going on and working together. For instance, our new medical school here that we're just have just opened, it's with in relationship and collaboration with Memorial University in Newfoundland, which is really fantastic. They know island medicine, and so we are using their curriculum for now, and it'll evolve, and hopefully we'll be able to train some of our doctors who will want to stay on Prince Edward Island. We are known for our veterinary college that we have here, our Faculty of Veterinary Medicine, and it feeds really well into the agriculture and food processing that we have on Prince Edward Island. So it's making those niches and clusters and taking advantage of them, and not trying to do everything that everybody else is doing what we do best.
Yeah, I like that. I like that a lot. I'm going to read out another question now, sort of a similar angle, but Renato Costa asks, what is the participation of enterprises, civil society, brackets family, in thinking outside of the box? So sort of going back to this community level, what is their role to play?
If no one else wants to answer, I could start us off. Because in transition into the working world, we know that engaging employers in the curriculum is a good thing. We know that that helps. And we also know that in smaller communities at schools, in school level, engaging employers in the life of a school in a rural community, some of the best practice in that area is to engage through families and family networks. So in small islands, and it depends on the size of your island, but in small islands, engaging with families and the community more widely can give you that engagement with what lives look like, what work looks like. So it might be a slightly more informal approach in the smallest communities and a slightly more formal approach in the larger islands. But somehow engaging with employers, families, communities more widely and bringing them into the curriculum is very helpful in helping young people to see that there are things that they can do in their communities and giving insights into the working world. So it gives a transition straight into the island labour markets, but then also potentially links them into kind of career learning more broadly, which can also take them away. So I would say it's very, very important, but it's not necessarily recognised enough how important it is.
Thank you, Dr. Alexander. Dr. Ferguson, I know you had your hand up.
Thank you so much. I think really Ariana, the last speaker, she said it, Rosie said it quite well. I think engaging with communities and families on that level is important, and schools themselves are a critical bridge in terms of inviting in these stakeholders. It also ties into the question that you asked before. So, inviting in employers and also individuals from these different sectors in terms of energy, agriculture, tourism, and so forth, water industry, and showing the pathways that are available to these young people. And not only pathways in terms of, you know, making money and having that security, obviously that is important, but it also pathways in terms of sustainability pathways within these industries. And so I think making more opportunities for that, inviting in these individuals to speak with these young people and empower them, because they are going to be the one, we're building a foundation. They're the ones who are going to be taking it forward. Many of them have started, whether it is from the high school level, whether it is at the university level, and just taking that forward and building on that foundation, I think is important.
Fantastic, thank you. We have time for one last question. Perhaps it's going to be a little bit of a biased answer, but I'm going to come to you first, Andrew. The question was, which islands or nations are leading place-based education access?
Well, strangely enough, I think the Scottish Islands are doing quite a good job when it comes to that. As we've been saying, but there are other places that are doing some great things as well. The Finnish Archipelago Institute in Åbo University in Finland is doing some great stuff with the Finnish archipelago, getting children involved in doing research into habitability in the islands, and I think that's a great example of what they're doing. But I mean, you can find other examples in other places. I think Canada is doing a great job as well, particularly in the Northern Territories. But yeah, if you're looking for an example of higher education, particularly that works across archipelagos, then have a good look at what UHI does. And Simon was suggesting there are problems. Of course, there are. Nothing's perfect, but it's a good example of a sort of distributed university that is place-based and has place at the core of its ethos, and is trying its best to meet the needs of the communities that it serves.
Fantastic. Simon, would you agree that Scotland is ahead of the game, or at least at the front when it comes to this innovation?
I think there are elements of what it's doing in UHI that are really, really positive, absolutely sector leading. I think what's a little bit frustrating is that it's difficult to get the long tail to follow the lead of the top practitioners, really, and so there's a lot of missed opportunities. Let's put it that way. And I think. But Andrew's right. There is some excellent innovation in the Highlands and Islands, and that some of that has really been spread to other parts of the world as well. So yeah, I don't want to disagree with what Andrew said.
Good. We like a healthy debate, but yeah, we're nearly coming to a close. So perhaps Dr. Brinklow, Dr. Alexander, or Dr. Ferguson, if you'd like to have any comments there about which islands or nations you believe are sort of innovating or leading on place-based education access, and then we'll wrap up.
I'll just say a couple of words thinking about the role of island universities is to really dig deep into where they're located. And what Rosie said about place is so important. And as educators, we should be making that front and center. And so I'm so pleased that Prince Edward Island, University of Prince Edward Island has supported the island studies, because we are an island, and it's in telling those stories back to ourselves that that's what makes for dynamic communities. People are attached to this place. They may go away, but they usually come back, and that's where the richness is in bringing in those outside notions. And so yeah, I'm really happy that we're doing that so well here. Thank you.
Thank you.
I would like to add that I thought Therese had a fantastic example from her university context of how things are being done. And I think we can learn a lot by looking across contexts. So, you know, there's fantastic stuff going on in Scotland. I knew about that. I used to live in Scotland. But one of the things that happened to me when I was working on that book project was I came across so many examples from the University of the South Pacific, from Tonga, from Greenland, all over the place. And I think we can learn a great deal by exposing ourselves to as many different kind of models and ideas of education practice as we can.
And just to follow on, in terms of what Rosie shared, I'm not going to comment as to which is ahead of the game in terms of place-based access, but just to say that I think islands in general are just doing a lot of work. It may not be documented or disseminated as much as we would like, but doing a lot of work in terms of pedagogical innovation. So place-based, project-based, all of these different means to connect individuals to place, because when the connection to place is there, we care for that place. We have that affinity, and we do what we can to protect it. Connecting individuals to communities through project-based work, so that there's that reciprocal learning. You know, universities as these institutions of higher education working alongside with communities, but also learning from them. So I think in general, islands are doing just phenomenal work in terms of the different pedagogical innovations and making headway in that.
Thank you so much, Dr. Ferguson, and thank you to all of our wonderful panelists for sharing such rich insights and to all of your questions and contributions in the chat. Sorry that we weren't able to address them all, but I'm sure if the panelists want to drop their emails or their LinkedIn's or anything into the chat, please do. Today we have had how island communities are turning these constraints into catalysts for innovation and education, creating opportunities that are rooted in culture, rooted in resilience, and also local leadership, with lessons that reach far beyond the islands themselves. As we've established, we're very much a global community. So in the spirit of island education, we've also just launched our first ever professional islands credential, the Sustainable Islands Strategies, Finance and Leadership for Innovation. This was an 8-week course online, as we're sort of in the conversation of remote learning, that is designed for professionals working in, with, or looking to transition into roles supporting island territories. And you can find more about this on our website and through the link that I just put in the chat. So as I said, please stay connected with Island Innovation and our speakers through the links in the chat and the conversations we've had today. And if you'd like to watch it back or share to people in your network, recording of this session will be available on Facebook, YouTube, LinkedIn, X, and our website. So we look forward to seeing the ideas that come from this conversation and the rest of the Virtual Island Summit. Thank you so much again to our wonderful panelists, and we look forward to connecting soon.
Thank you.